the department. Can I allow you to say something?
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, firstly, I'd like to address these in the order that they were asked. So if I start off with Mr. Boshoff, this question of that South Africa is a secular state, I was challenged that as a myth and very misleading on a number of points, and especially with regard to education. Firstly, the Constitution starts with a preamble that acknowledges God, and secondly, we have specifically a clause on education in the Constitution that allows for religious observances, and I know that that was put in very specifically by the Constitutional Assembly to avoid an American-type situation of the 1960 wrong interpretation of the American Constitution that then excluded religious observances in the schools. Now, that clause in the Constitution needs to be read in parallel with the Schools Act, which was written also at the same time in 1996, and which parallels it in almost identical wording, except for the changing of a few words, which further clarifies that the authority that is intended by the Constitution to make that decision on religious observances is the school governing body. Okay, so that is the first issue. The second issue is that at the time, there was huge protest from parents about the risk that South Africa would have a secular state, and we had a promise specifically from Cyril Ramaphosa that South Africa would not be a secular state. That was reported in the newspapers. So that is on the interpretation. I think you're not going to find any of those people who were around at the time interpreting that way. Further, one has Minister Bengu's policy that he instituted at the time, the first education minister that was after the Constitution, explicitly that his religion policy allowed for different schools to have complete freedom to choose a single medium religious instruction if they wanted to, paralleling the policies of Nigeria and of Israel, for example. So this is a myth, and there are many ways of accommodating difference within the parent body. That includes, firstly, different schools having different policies and people choosing that. Then within a school, you can have streams where people go off and have different religious observances if they want to. And then you can also have conscientious objection, which is a third level to accommodate parents. So that is something which is simply not a correct interpretation. Now, we've had this progressive erosion since Minister Bengu's very good policy of religious freedom and parental rights. That was, and Minister Kata Asmal took a huge chunk out of that freedom with his 2003 religion and education policy. He had a meeting in this building at which I was present, in which he then presented his policy, claiming he had now listened to parents and religious bodies that were protesting against that. I put 10 points that we had not agreed with forward to the group. I was thrown out by security. Okay, there is no agreement. We did not agree to that policy. We continue to protest against that. Then further, there was the court judgment in 2017, which 6 schools were challenged on their religious observances. We would argue that was a wrong court judgment. It should have been appealed. It will be appealed in future. That is not a correct interpretation of the Constitution. Anybody who wants to discuss this is welcome to speak to me, or we can have a debate on radio or whatever. But to me, this is a power grab by the state from parents and away from religious freedom, and we want that power back again. Then the question that the parents must, through those structures, decide on how that money is, that public money is distributed in various ways according to their preferences. I can talk more than that. I don't want to run out of time. Then, in terms of the question of Mr. Zwele, in what way is the BELA bill taking away that right to decide? These are small incremental erosions every time a decision-making power is taken away from parents and given to central government. And we want maximum devolved to the lowest possible level for decisions to be made for those children in homeschooling, in private schools, in that particular school, or in a stream within that school. Then the question of language being used to exclude people. We've got 1 in 20 schools in this country which are using Afrikaans language. And personally, I don't want to speak the Afrikaans language, but I have another friend who has chosen, he's English, but he's chosen to send his children to an Afrikaans school because he likes the religious ethos of that school. And any parent has that choice if they want to go. That my ancestors were German speaking when they came to this country. They had to learn English, but that is for they could have carried on in German if they decided to be homeschooled, but this is the choice we want to give to parents. And look, things are imperfect in any society when we have to make common decisions, but we have to decide which problems the state needs to intervene on. And I'd say where there are really serious problems and parents are wanting help, then the state gets involved on those things. Then the question of which clauses, I'll be happy to read through each clause, but probably I'm going to be given a timeout. So I will make another submission. I've given it in my detailed 6-page submission, all the clause numbers, but I will make a summary of the clause numbers to refer to all of these things, and I will send that to the committee secretary. The question of the penalties from Nomaselo, but with homeschooling, I accept that it was not the intention of the department to do this, but we do not want to have a power which can be misused by a political leader in future. And having followed the political process for 30 years, I have seen many times unintended consequences. I've warned about them and they've happened. So I don't put it past this happening. And so we'd like to separate the question of criminal obstruction from parental choice, and so that no parent is ever at risk of going to jail on these things. Then the question of what should remain with parents, I think I've elaborated in a whole lot more detail, and I'd be happy to, if the chairperson would give me more time, but essentially we want to maximize the powers given to parents through those 3 tiers that I just gave, of the school governing body making a policy, of streams within a school, of conscientious objection if the parents not happy with something, and that also includes the right to opt out of things like sex education or religious things they're not happy with. The question of homeschoolings, how does one verify these things that was asked? I would propose that each parent should keep a portfolio of what they've been teaching their children that is available for inspection if necessary. That would not require consultants' costs, and particularly the accountability, I would say, would be if some relative then or friend claims, okay, these children are not being educated, well, the parent can then produce that portfolio of what they've been teaching them. Then the question of focusing on broken schools, yes, exactly. I think that if there are problems with, some child doesn't get into the school that they want to because of the language policy, that's a pretty minor problem. We've got crisis problems in some schools of complete dysfunction, of gangs dominating the school. Those are the schools that the education department needs to be focusing on, and to get functional. Most of these schools don't have a functional SGB, and those are the schools that need help from the government, not the schools that have a functional SGB having their powers taken away from them. The question on mother tongue education, I would argue that that is a debatable question, which is for those parents to answer and not for me to answer. I know I have a friend who started a school in Zululand, English medium, and a lot of parents were very happy to send their children to that. Other people would prefer Zulu medium, or other people want Afrikaans medium. That's not really for us to decide. That is for those parents to make that decision, and according to the choices that are available to them. And I also want that widened choice to include cottage schools. Then the question of not limiting the powers of the parent, I think one only wants to limit the powers of the parents with respect to other parents where there is a need to force for a common policy. But within the framework that I proposed, you'd have a maximum diversity and empowerment of parents. So the question of amending the Constitution, personally, I don't think the Constitution needs amendment on this, on the education clause. It already allows for this question of religious ethos. It's just that it's been wrongly interpreted by the court. I did have a discussion with one of the lawyers who was involved in drafting the Constitution, and he expressed to me that he felt that his one regret was a failure to include a clause on the protection of the family, and quite possibly that is an amendment that we need to include, paralleling the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. That is also in the Western Cape Constitution. So possibly, yes, that would be a good idea, but I don't think the problem is the Constitution. I think the problem is the way the Constitution is being misinterpreted by, I think, secularists and woke people who believe that their interpretation is the only one that is allowed in the schools. I don't think it's correct. Yeah, so with respect to these, the rebuttal of the department, I appreciate they didn't have that intended effect, but I'm been involved in making submissions on many laws which had unintended effects, and we don't want the possibility of those effects. And we've got to look at the question of what is the greater evil that we are trying to avoid, as opposed to these other problems. And the greater evil is avoided by giving maximum power to parents to make decisions. There will be some flaws, but that is the best way forward. Then in terms of this avoidance of corruption, yes, I agree we need to avoid corruption, but this is complete overkill. Corruption is avoided by strong SGBs and accountability to the parents that would get the best people off not wanting to be part of the SGB. And one can deal with this clause. Section 36 of the Constitution requires looking at the less restrictive means to achieve what an end. And the less restrictive means that I would propose is that any business that an SGB person has with the school should be publicly disclosed, and preferably they shouldn't be allowed to do any business at all. They don't need to declare every single thing that they are doing. They're sacrificing a whole lot of their time and their skills to help the school, and good people are going to be discouraged from that. You don't need to get them to violate their financial privacy, much less that of their children or their wife or somebody who might not want to do that. So my appeal is that the solution is empowering parents and letting them sort out the problems rather than to try and sort out all the problems for them. And where government puts its effort is not into micro-regulating homeschooling and functional SGBs, but into dealing with these enormous problems where you have gangs and drug pushers that are dominating certain schools. We need to strengthen those so that they have parent-led situations. And also in terms of improvement, there's two proposals. One is that I've spoken to the school governing body associations, and they have offered to help other schools that don't have good governing bodies to become functional. That proposal hasn't been accepted. The second proposal is that one allows charter schools, which are partnerships with independent organizations, which can be a business or an NGO, that then says, we will work in partnership with the school, they will have our ethos, and we will put money and time and effort into that. So then that becomes semi-private. We've never had a situation where everybody is happy with the Department of Education's policy, but this framework for diversity is the best one solution that we can come up with.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosanta.